I fell asleep earlier than intended last night, the kind of heavy, dreamless sleep that comes only after a day when both body and mind finally agree to surrender at the same time. Because of that, I missed my journal entry, which bothered me more than I expected. Recording each day has become less of a habit and more of a quiet promise to myself, a way of proving that these days here, in this strange and growing corner of the frontier, are real and not some long drifting interlude between crises. When I woke, the air carried that crisp early morning stillness that belongs only to settlements still young enough to breathe with the land around them. Liz arrived promptly at 0700, cheerful as ever, already walking before she even finished greeting me. We set out along the perimeter paths, talking about nothing important and everything at once, the way people do when they are comfortable enough not to fill every silence. By the time we reached Checkers for breakfast, my step counter read 10,000 exactly, which she insisted meant I had earned whatever Marcus had decided we were eating. Marcus, of course, had already ordered for everyone. He has that habit, deciding things just slightly ahead of you, never rudely, never forcefully, but with the quiet confidence of someone who is almost always right. Today's surprise was something he called coffee cake, a dish I had never encountered before in any of the worlds or stations I've lived on. It arrived warm, fragrant, and dusted lightly with powdered sweetness, its interior soft and rich with apples layered through it, touched by cinnamon and some form of crystallized sugar that melted just enough to glaze the fruit. The top had a crisp crust that cracked delicately under the fork. Marcus, watching my expression with the patience of a man waiting for a verdict, produced a jar of strawberry preserves like a magician revealing his final trick. Spread across the warm slice, the preserves melted slightly, the tart sweetness mixing with the spice and apple until the whole thing tasted like something designed not merely to feed but to persuade. It was good, far better than I expected, and that was when I realized breakfast was not just breakfast. The entire meal had been a setup. Marcus leaned back and casually explained that he had brokered a trade arrangement with a supplier in the capital, someone recommended through Tornell's network, which meant the contact was almost certainly vetted, discreet, and interested in long-term cooperation. This supplier specialized in preserves, jellies, and jams, goods considered luxuries in frontier regions but staples in civilized trade hubs. The proposal was simple. A few cases of assorted flavors in exchange for apples from our storage surplus. I asked what a few meant, and Marcus, with the same tone someone might use to describe the weather, suggested perhaps a couple of cases of each to start. Before I could respond, Ano chirped up from across the table, crumbs still clinging to his sleeve, suggesting that if we were going to do this, we should do it properly. 10 to 20 cases of each flavor, or better yet bulk stock that we could repackage under our own banner. He even suggested imprinting our house shield onto the labels. That comment tugged unexpectedly at an old memory, and with it came the unwelcome image of Angus. The thought sharpened my mood instantly. I hope he gets what he deserves one day. He had best never cross paths with Wyatt or Cynthia. If justice exists in any meaningful form, it will not be gentle when it finds him. Perhaps Clara could strip him of his nobility if she ever chose to intervene. I made a note to research whether that authority truly rests with her or if it requires a council petition. I caught myself drifting into anger and forced the thought aside. No sense letting ghosts from old grievances poison a perfectly good morning. Marcus, meanwhile, had already sent the message confirming an order for 20 cases of each flavor. 20. That is an extraordinary quantity of sweets for a settlement still measuring its growth in sawmills and supply ledgers, but I could not deny the strategic sense behind it. Such goods trade well, travel well, and make excellent gifts. Clara, I suspect, would be delighted. The idea of pastries filled with jam alone might win her approval of the entire arrangement. Marcus even structured the offer so payment could be made in apples, eggs, or fish depending on what the supplier preferred. Watching him negotiate is like watching a chess player who sees moves 3 turns ahead while pretending he is simply chatting. Efficient barely begins to describe it. Ano, for his part, declared he didn't particularly care about the scale of the deal so long as he personally received a jar or two. He has a sweet tooth that could probably be weaponized if properly researched. I made a mental note to keep an emergency ration hidden somewhere he would never think to check. After breakfast I placed an order for additional sauce supplies, totaling just under 2,000 credits. The merchant I spoke with turned out to be unexpectedly curious about the souvenirs we've been producing and selling. She asked whether I could assemble a dedicated package deal for her market. Her tone suggested genuine interest rather than polite obligation, which is always a promising sign. I told her I would review inventory and get back to her soon. She sounded kind, professional, and sharp enough to recognize opportunity when she heard it. Perhaps we could create a limited run exclusive to Hago, something humorous stamped on it like we burned the Drazen and all we got was scrap from their ships. The thought alone made me laugh more than it should have. The rest of the late morning passed in careful collaboration with the accounting team. We have reached that stage of settlement growth where success depends less on grand construction and more on enabling others to build their own livelihoods. Helping residents establish home businesses is slower work than raising walls, but it is infinitely more important. A settlement with shops, crafts, and independent trade becomes a community. Without them, it is just a camp that hasn't realized it yet. Liz arrived around midday carrying lunch. Salad with chicken, sliced apples, and nuts, simple but fresh and satisfying. She mentioned Marcus had already spoken to her about the apple trade and agreed that we currently possess more food reserves than we strictly require. Surplus is a luxury I never take lightly. Surplus means breathing room. Surplus means options. Later, I sent a message to Ano outlining another idea. Smoked fish sealed inside polished wooden boxes, our house banner burned carefully into the underside along with a thank you mark signed WS/Wolfhound, each one numbered as a limited series gift for members of the Nori Navio. Aside from the goodwill such gifts generate, they also qualify for a rather generous tax deduction. Efficiency, after all, should never be wasted. Now evening has settled in quietly. I'm seated with a scone in one hand and a cup of spiced apple tea warming the other, watching the last of the light fade beyond the settlement roofs. In a little while I'll head over to Liz's for dinner. She claims she's developed a new herbal blend designed to calm the mind and help with sleep, and she insists I try it alongside a fish dish she's been perfecting. I am skeptical, considering she herself seems powered by an internal reactor rather than rest, but I admire her confidence. I think I'll bring my sleep gown and pack a small bag just in case I stay the night. Sometimes the simplest evenings, tea, conversation, and the quiet presence of someone you trust restore more strength than any amount of rest alone. If all goes well, I'll write again tomorrow. And if I fall asleep early once more, well, perhaps that will simply mean day 54 was peaceful enough to allow it. Night settled gently over the barony, not with the oppressive weight of darkness that haunted unsettled lands, but with the calm assurance of a place learning it no longer needed to fear the horizon. The path to Liz's residence curved along a lantern-lit walkway where newly planted saplings swayed faintly in the evening breeze, their leaves whispering like distant surf. The settlement had begun to develop its own nighttime voice. Soft hammering from late craftsmen, muffled laughter drifting from open windows, the low hum of generators cycling into their rest phases. These were the sounds of continuity, of systems working as intended, of people trusting tomorrow enough to stop rushing today. I found myself walking slower than usual, not from fatigue but from a strange reluctance to disturb the peace by arriving anywhere too quickly. Liz's door was already open when I reached it, warm golden light spilling across the threshold as if the house itself were welcoming visitors. Inside, the air carried a layered fragrance, herbs, citrus, and something faintly floral I couldn't immediately identify. She greeted me with that same boundless energy she always seemed to possess, moving from table to counter to stove in a rhythm that suggested she had been anticipating this evening for hours. A kettle steamed quietly beside a tray of small glass vials containing different tea blends, each labeled in her careful script. She explained that she had been experimenting with combinations meant to calm neural activity without dulling awareness, a delicate balance most pharmacologists struggle to achieve even with synthesized compounds. Liz, of course, had decided to attempt it with leaves and patience. Dinner itself was simple but precise. Lightly smoked fish flaked into tender portions, served with a subtle glaze that tasted faintly of citrus and wild honey. She watched my reaction closely as I tried the first bite, the way an engineer watches a prototype during its first activation. It was excellent, clean, balanced, and comforting without being heavy. She beamed with satisfaction, then poured the tea. The liquid shimmered pale gold, releasing a gentle aroma that seemed to settle around the senses rather than rush them. I took a sip. Warmth spread gradually, not the sharp heat of stimulants or the dull drag of sedatives, but a steady, reassuring calm. If her goal had been to create something that persuaded the mind to loosen its grip on tension, she had succeeded. We talked for a long while after that, conversation drifting from trade logistics to settlement gossip to speculation about what the next supply convoy might bring. Liz has a way of listening that makes you realize how rarely most people truly do. She doesn't interrupt, doesn't rush, doesn't prepare her reply while you're still speaking. She absorbs, considers, and then answers with a thought that somehow improves your own. At some point I realized the tension I usually carried between my shoulders had disappeared. Not reduced, gone. The sensation was unfamiliar enough that I had to roll my shoulders once just to confirm it. Outside, the wind shifted, brushing softly against the walls. Somewhere in the distance a night watch signal chimed, low and steady, marking the hour. The settlement was secure. The forests beyond remained quiet. Even the insects seemed to hum more softly tonight, as if aware that this particular stretch of time had been reserved for rest rather than vigilance. Liz eventually insisted I stay rather than walk back in the dark, pointing out that I had already brought my bag and therefore clearly intended to. I didn't argue. She prepared a small guest space near the window where the curtains were thin enough to let moonlight filter through. From there I could see the faint outline of the settlement's outer lights glowing like grounded stars along the perimeter. It struck me how different that sight would have felt weeks ago, when every light meant exposure and every shadow meant risk. Now the lights meant safety. Now the shadows meant sleep. As I lay down, the herbal tea's calming effect settled deeper, not pulling me under but easing me gently toward rest. My last waking thought was a quiet one, that days like this, filled with trade deals, shared meals, and small victories no one would ever record in official logs, might actually be the most important kind. Empires are remembered for battles. But lives are built from evenings like this. If tomorrow arrives as peacefully as today ended, I suspect the barony will wake stronger than it realizes. Sleep did not come all at once. It arrived the way dawn does on calm worlds, slowly, gently, and with a kind of patience that felt almost deliberate. I drifted in that quiet space between waking and dreaming, aware of the faint creak of wood as the night air cooled the frame of Liz's house, aware of the distant rhythm of the settlement's automated systems cycling through their maintenance phases, aware of my own breathing settling into an even cadence. It was a rare sensation for my mind to loosen its grip on vigilance. Usually, even in rest, some part of me remained alert, listening for alarms, threats, or sudden changes in atmosphere. Tonight, though, the silence felt trustworthy. That alone made it extraordinary. At some indistinct hour, I woke briefly. Moonlight had shifted across the room, now resting in a pale band along the floorboards. The air smelled faintly of herbs and warm wood, the lingering trace of Liz's experiments still present. I listened out of habit. No alarms. No hurried footsteps. No coded signals from the perimeter watch. Only the steady quiet of a settlement that had learned how to exist without constant fear. Satisfied, I let my eyes close again. Morning came softly. Not with noise, but with light. The sun filtered through the thin curtains in narrow gold strands that painted the wall in gentle lines. For a moment I simply lay there, watching dust motes drift lazily through the brightness. It struck me that I couldn't remember the last time I had awakened without urgency. No summons. No reports. No crisis waiting at the edge of consciousness. Just light, warmth, and the distant clink of dishes from another room. Liz was already awake, of course. When I stepped out, she stood at the counter arranging small ceramic cups in a neat row, each filled with a different shade of tea. She glanced over her shoulder, smiled as if she had expected that exact moment, and said she wanted me to evaluate which blend worked best after a full night's rest. I laughed quietly, still adjusting to the unfamiliar feeling of being well slept. We sampled each one slowly, comparing notes like scholars analyzing rare specimens. One was brighter, another earthier, a third carried a cooling aftertaste that lingered along the palate. She recorded every reaction in a small notebook, her handwriting precise and deliberate. Watching her work, I realized that this quiet dedication to perfecting something small and kind was its own form of strength. Breakfast was simple: toasted bread, sliced fruit, and a light drizzle of honey. Nothing elaborate, nothing staged. Just food shared without agenda. We spoke about the coming week's supply manifests, about the artisans requesting workshop space, about Marcus's likely reaction when the jam shipment actually arrived. Liz predicted he would pretend it had all been part of a larger plan from the beginning. I suspected she was right. Eventually I gathered my things, slinging the pack over my shoulder and stepping back outside. Morning in the Barony carried a different energy than evening. Where night had been calm and reflective, dawn was purposeful. Workers crossed the paths with tools in hand, early traders rolled carts toward the square, and somewhere nearby a sawmill had already begun its steady mechanical rhythm. The forest beyond the settlement line stood tall and watchful, its canopy stirring gently in the breeze like a living wall that had decided, for now, to remain friendly. As I walked back along the lantern path, now extinguished in daylight, I felt a quiet certainty settle in my chest. Not excitement, not relief, but something steadier. Confidence. The kind that doesn't shout or boast, the kind that simply exists because enough small things have gone right for long enough to prove they can. The Barony was changing. Not dramatically, not overnight, but undeniably. Trade routes were forming. Homes were multiplying. People were beginning to speak about next month instead of just tomorrow. When I reached my door, I paused before going inside, turning once more to look across the rooftops. Sunlight flashed briefly off a distant window, bright enough to make me squint. In that glint I saw a reflection of everything we'd built so far, fragile, imperfect, but real. I made a quiet note to write all of this down later, before memory softened the edges. Days like these might never appear in official histories. They wouldn't be marked by battles or treaties or grand declarations. But they were the days that made those larger moments possible. Foundations are rarely celebrated, yet without them nothing stands. And today, more than any day before it, the Barony of Screaming Forests felt like something that intended to stand for a very long time.